Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome back for my reading. People have been listening on the podcast, on the audio version. Very interesting. We're reading today. Make sure everything's right. Oh, my volume. Have to make sure the volume's high. Have to make sure the volume is high. Keep forgetting that. All right. We're reading from Lost Christianities. Bart Ehrman. Some people don't like him. I like his book. I have Lost Christianities and Lost Scriptures. They used to have these book things where you would buy one at regular price and you would get like 5 for $1 or something ridiculous like that. And I took advantage of that. Got some really good books. That's back when you were trying to improve your library, when that was a big deal. So let's get into, we're going to talk about Gnostics. And I might do more readings. I might do readings every weekday and then do support group on Sunday, a live support group. I think I'm going to do that. And I'll start advertising it on my social media tonight. The sources of our knowledge of Gnosticism. What more precisely was the Gnostic view? One of the difficulties in summarizing it has to do with the ancient sources that are available. For centuries, in fact, all the time prior to the discovery of original Gnostic documents, our only sources of information about Gnosticism were the writings of the Orthodox and Proto-Orthodox Church Fathers who opposed it. Writers like Irenaeus, Bishop of Lyons, who around 180 CE composed a 5-volume work, Refutation and Overthrow of Gnosis, falsely so-called, usually simply called Against Heresies. Tertullian of Carthage, who about 20 years later wrote a number of treatises against various heretics, and his contemporary Hippolytus of Rome, whose own work, Refutation of All Heresies, was itself discovered only in the 19th century. These writers give full, sometimes interminable descriptions of Gnosticism, but they have nothing good to say about it. Gnostics are consistently ridiculed for espousing absurd or absurdly complex myths, for corrupting the clear teachings of Scripture, clear that is to the Proto-Orthodox, for espousing self-contradictory views, for encouraging wild and licentious activities that reveal their true colors or reprobates and deviance from the truth. That's why I say make videos, make recordings. We must record what's going on so that if there's a future, there's a record. Because oftentimes, people who are in power try to erase other people's records. But with this internet, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very hard. And even today, they try to create a reality in the minds of the mainstream because they can deliver information to you easier through your television set, whereas you have to go to the YouTube, you have to go to the channel, you have to go to... So, record. Back to the reading. We will look at some of these lively polemics in a later chapter. For now, it is enough to note that if we want to know Gnostics really believed, or what the Gnostics really believed, it is difficult to trust the claims of their sworn enemies. It is true that these proto-Orthodox authors sometimes use actual Gnostic documents and appear on occasion to have summarized them more or less accurately. When they do so, all to the good, but it is not always easy to know when we have reliable reportage and when we have scurrilous slander or a clever mixture of the two. Fortunately, we do have other sources available for our study of Gnostic Christianity. Several original Gnostic documents were available even before the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library. documents discovered in the 18th and 19th centuries. At the time of their discovery, however, these documents made little impact on the world of scholarship, let alone the rest of the world. Partly because the accounts found in them did not readily square with those provided by the proto-Orthodox heresiologists. Erroneous and his successor, in a remarkable move that I suppose we should be accustomed to by now, scholars studying the phenomenon decided that these original Gnostic texts were less to be trusted than the reports of the proto-Orthodox enemies of Gnosticism. That the Gnostic texts must in some way be aberrations from the Gnostic norm, so they shunted them to one side. That is no longer possible. Since the discovery of the texts near Nag Hammadi, many of them written by Gnostics, for Gnostics, presupposing Gnostic perspectives. Not even these documents, however, are problem-free for trying to make sense of the phenomenon. For one thing, the very fact that some of these texts presuppose Gnostic views make them difficult to understand. It is somewhat like reading the sports page. An article about the first game of the World Series will not give a detailed account of the history and the rules of baseball. It is written for insiders who already have all the background information they need to make sense of the report. So it is with many of the Gnostic texts that from Nag Hammadi, they are books for insiders who, unlike us, already have all the background information they need. And there are other problems. Some of these texts are incomplete in that over the centuries since their production, they have been worn out in places. Many of the manuscripts are riddled with holes, their missing words needing to be filled in. Sometimes restoring these texts is not overly difficult, but on other occasions we cannot be sure what is in the gaps. In the Gospel of Philip, for example, which is a seemingly random series of reflections and dialogues of Jesus and his disciples about the secrets of the universe, meaning of the world, and our place in it, the disciples are upset about Jesus' relationship with Mary Magdalene and ask, why do you love her more than us, or than all of us? They are responding to something Jesus has done, but what is it? The preceding text is full of holes as follows. And the companion of the small gap in manuscript, Mary Magdalene, small gap, her more than small gap, the disciple, small gap, kiss her, small gap, on the small gap. Gospel of Philip 55. Our curiosity notwithstanding, we simply cannot know what was in the gaps. I've read the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Mary. I love the Gospel of Mary. If you ever get a chance to read it, read it. It's in Lost Scriptures, but I'm sure you can find it somewhere in the Gospel of Mary. Probably the biggest problem with the Nag Hammadi text, however, is the one I have already alluded to, that they do not contain one coherent picture of the Gnostic myth, belief, and practice, but represent widely divergent and disparate understandings of the world. The divine realm, humans, Christ, and so on. We should probably speak of Gnosticism rather than Gnosticism. Gnosticisms rather than Gnosticism. So there's different kinds of Gnostics. Still, there do seem to be some wide-ranging agreements in basic worldview among many of these texts and the systems that appear to presuppose, as we can patch them together from both the texts themselves and the descriptions of their enemies. Here I lay out some of the overarching tenets that appear to apply to these particular Gnostic systems, discuss some of the mythologies used to present these perspectives, and provide an overview of several of the more interesting texts that have been discovered. And we'll pick up tomorrow from there. Listen, every system has a mystical, or every teaching has a mystical side. I believe with Judaism it's the Kabbalic. I think with Islam, isn't it Sufi? Because there's Shia, Sunni. Yeah, I think Sufi is the mysticism, if I'm correct, and you could correct me if I'm wrong. And with Christianity, it's Gnostics. Is one of the more mystical sides, and the mystical sides usually are the deeper ones, the deeper sides. If I had read this book when I was younger, I probably would still be a Christian. You know, most black people are Christians because our parents are Christians. But I like Gnosticism. I gotta say, I like Gnosticism. And you get older, and you know, I could see it. The more you study, the more you're going to like the mystical side. Not because it's weird, but because you understand concepts and all the little personal feelings and things that we go through. The concepts are the ones that are constant: justice, injustice, equality, inequality, indifference, empathy, creativity, mediocrity, and conformity and expansion. Those kinds of things. And it's always a tug of war, it's always a both. Some people say you need balance, but I don't know. I mean, I don't like being between justice and injustice. I'm justice all the time, every moment. You got to be fair. Fair doesn't always mean nice, it just means fair. What is fair? And you have to think about those things. And the more you think about those things, the more you start to realize some of the things we call injustice are not injustices. And I always give this example, but it's like, I remember when I was a teenager. Was I a teenager still, or late teen? But I remember them saying that I might have been late teens, because I might have been in college at this point. I might have been like 19, 20, 21. I remember a report came out, and some of you might remember this one. 1 out of 3, and they said this: 1 out of 3 black boys will go to prison. And they didn't say it, but it was kind of implied that 1 out of 3 would be killed. And which meant that you had a 1 out of 3 chance of making it if you were a black boy. And they were basically telling us, whenever you hear reports about projections, at least I found this, that means this is what they plan to do with you. So one of the ways that, and I don't know if the ruling class does this in every country or the people in power does this in every country, but in this country, one of the ways they get away with it is they tell you what they're going to do. Once they tell you what they're going to do, then you have to create an opposition to that. And we never created an opposition to it. We just went along with it. And then, sure enough, 1 out of 3 was in prison. I don't know if 1 out of 3 actually died, but a lot of us went to prison. It was a lot. Or some kind of juvenile detention halls, or special ed, or in-school suspensions. You know, the penal system is large. The prison system is big, is large. So that's one instance where you say, well, nah, it's injustice. What they're doing to us is not fair. But they've actually warned you that they're going to do it. And so you have to say, hey, another thing is, Carter G. Woodson published The Miseducation of the Negro. And if you read through that book, it talks about how school systems really miseducate you. And then all kinds of books were published before that time, and because miseducation of Negro is almost 100 years old. And after that time and during that time, talking about how bad the school system is. Now, as parents, you have to create something, an alternative, a supplement, something. And up until the 70s, we always did that. Black people always did that. We had all kinds of study groups, all kinds of things. You had the 5% Nation, they had their thing. There has always been alternatives to studying the regular school system. And then late 70s, by the early 80s, there was just no alternatives. So for the last 40, 50 years, we've had complete miseducation from one end and nothing on the other end, just nothing. And in the last, I would say 20, 30 years, up until 2020, our community has been very hostile to those of us who wanted to offer some reality. Very hostile to us. Because I guess reality is so painful for us, they see us as wanting to cause pain. When all we want to do is cause you to be engaged with reality so that when it bursts through your bubble, that you're not overwhelmed and overtaken with it. And we see a lot of people are being overwhelmed by reality. A lot of it is causing people die from this. I have seen literally people choose death rather than embrace reality. Meaning they work themselves to death trying to keep the delusion going, or they just say, well, I don't care what the reality is, I'm going to do the behavior, and if the reality conflicts with that and destroys my body, destroys my mind, I'm just going to let it, because I will not let go of the delusion. And I've seen it happen, and I hope that doesn't happen to you all. So that's why I do a lot of these readings, and I try to give classes, and I do all the information. That's what it's for. I have to do my part, because like I said, I am justice. At least I try to be. Every moment of every day. Nobody's perfect. I make mistakes, of course, but that is what it means to be conceptual. I'll see you tomorrow. If you want to support the podcast, you know what to do. Give directly, click the links, become a sponsor, and talk to you tomorrow. Until then, try to be careful, try to take care of yourselves, and try to be safe.